Hospitals are the crossroads between life and death, places where miracles happen, but also where the ordinary collides with the inexplicable. For many nurses who work the night shift, especially in the emergency room, these sterile corridors take on an entirely new identity when the sun goes down. The sights, the sounds, and the emotions of desperate families and determined healthcare workers combine under flickering fluorescent lights to create an atmosphere heavy with tension and sometimes something else, something unexplainable. Let me take you down those dimly lit corridors, behind the creaking doors and past humming machines, where a select few have encountered things that shadow the line between reality and nightmare. These stories are told in whispers, swapped over lukewarm coffee during the blackest hours of the night shift. Some laugh nervously and dismiss them as tricks of the mind or an overactive imagination. Yet for others, these experiences remain vivid and unshakable, a chilling reminder that sometimes the dead do not rest as quietly as we hope. Every emergency room nurse, it seems, has encountered something that makes the hairs on the back of their neck stand up. Listen closely as I recount the legends and personal experiences passed from nurse to nurse. Stories that will make you think twice before turning out the lights. Stories that breathe life into the very walls you trust to protect you. It began, for one nurse simply enough, working a double shift on a stormy autumn night in a hospital that had stood since before the turn of the century. Her name was Eliza, and she had always prided herself on her rational mind. She waved off tales of hauntings and ghostly patients, attributing them to exhaustion and overwork. But even Eliza was unprepared for what that night would bring. As midnight approached, the ER was surprisingly quiet. Nurses clustered at the central desk, reviewing paperwork while sipping scalding coffee. Thunder rumbled in the distance, each flash of lightning briefly silhouetting the skeletal trees outside. Eliza was catching up on charting, grateful for the lull, when the call light flickered on from room 3. Room 3. It wasn't technically in use. The last patient from there had left hours earlier, and the bed was stripped. Exchanged a glance with the other nurses. The call button had a history, sometimes sticking, sometimes wired incorrectly, but every time maintenance came through, their tinkering seemed only to make things worse. Somebody mumbled about old building, old wiring, and Eliza shrugged it off. She walked down to room 3, heels clicking on linoleum, the din of the nurses' station fading behind her. The door was ajar. Pushing inside, she was met with the clinical scent of bleach and fresh linen. The room empty except for a newly made bed and a single blinking monitor. The call button glowed softly on the wall. Eliza pressed the button to reset it and reached to switch off the light. That's when she saw the outline on the bed, a perfect shadowy impression of a person, as if someone had just rested there, even though nobody had entered since the bed was made. Eliza hesitated, frowning, before firmly shaking her head. She dismissed it as some trick of the mind, the result of exhaustion and the uneven glow from the storm outside. With one last glance, she backed out of the room, but the call light would not stay off. Every time she returned to the desk, within 5 minutes, it would flicker back on. From room 3. Finally, tired of repeating herself, Eliza dragged another nurse with her, intent on proving she wasn't losing her mind. Together they entered the room. This time, a distinct scent hung in the air, a mixture of antiseptic and something else. Flowers, maybe, or perfume. The impression on the bed remained. If anything, it seemed deeper now, as if the invisible figure resting there had sunk further into the mattress. Eliza's fellow nurse, Angela, grew pale. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Faint, almost inaudible over the hum of the building, came a rhythmic gasping breath, almost like someone fighting for air. Panic prickled up Eliza's forearms. Both women retreated, suddenly eager to be out of the vacant room. Later, they would learn that room 3 had a long, tragic history. Decades ago, before cardiopulmonary advances, it had served as a resuscitation bay, and many souls had departed their bodies there. One patient, in particular, was infamous. A woman named Mrs. Carraway, who'd suffered a massive heart attack and passed away, alone except for a young nurse who held her hand until it was over. People said she still came back, seeking comfort, pressing the call light for someone to sit with her until she felt safe enough to move on. Word got around after that night. Nurses began leaving a small folded blanket at the foot of the bed in room 3, and the call light incidents grew fewer. Some nights it still flickered on, but now, rather than fear, the nurses whispered a gentle, "Good night, Mrs. Carraway," as they passed. Of course, that's only the start. Every hospital has its own stories, some even older, some darker. Take the story of Nurse Franklin, who worked the graveyard shift in a hospital built on the bones of an abandoned tuberculosis sanatorium. In the quiet lull between patients, she would hear the distant echo of children's laughter. Impossible, given that the ER was adults only, and the pediatric wing had closed years ago. Sometimes, she'd see small, dusty footprints appear on the gleaming tile floors, out of nowhere, tracking through the hallways, vanishing at sealed doorways, or ending abruptly in the middle of a room. One night, a code blue erupted in the farthest corner of the ER. A patient, a homeless man, collapsed without warning. As the resuscitation team raced to save him, Franklin held his hand, murmuring soothing words until his breathing steadied. Just after the crisis passed, she glanced up and, for an instant, thought she saw a small girl standing in the far corner, dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown. Her hair was matted, her eyes hollow and sad. When Franklin blinked, the girl vanished, but in her place lay a tiny yellowed rag doll, its button eyes staring upward, its mouth sewn in a crooked smile. The doll was gone by morning, but Franklin never forgot the girl's gaze. Even the modern wings are not immune. New hospitals, with their glass facades and comforting colors, still accumulate stories. Sarah, a recent graduate, was assigned a string of overnight ER shifts. The adjustment was tough, the pace frenetic, the patients unpredictable, but what surprised her most were the stories circulating among seasoned staff, accounts of the man in blue. Supposedly, this spectral figure appeared only to those on the brink of death, a tall man in scrubs who would stand at the foot of a patient's bed, gaze down, and somehow always remain unnoticed except by the one who mattered most. At first, Sarah dismissed it as superstition, until she met Mr. Hollis, an elderly man with end-stage renal failure brought in by his daughter. He seemed jovial, stubbornly optimistic about his prognosis. Sarah sat with him through the small hours as his family rested, listening to war stories and tales of old New York. Around 4 a.m., as she checked his vitals, Mr. Hollis grew quiet, peering over her shoulder at something she couldn't see. "Do you know that man?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Sarah turned. No one was there. He says it's time to go. He looks kind enough. Is he a doctor? Chills crawled up Sarah's spine. Gently, she assured him there was no one else in the room. But Mr. Hollis only shook his head, a strange calm settling over his features. He passed quietly an hour later, a faint smile playing on his lips. When maintenance came to clear the room, they found a single blue-gloved handprint on the inside of the window. A window that hadn't been opened in weeks. Hospitals hold so much life, so many stories, that the walls themselves seem saturated with memory. But the truly disturbing tales, the ones that lodge deep in the minds of those who have worked the night shift, often begin with something mundane, a misplaced chart, a strange shadow, or an odd temperature drop. Yet, over and over, what starts small reveals itself as something much greater and far more unnerving. Take the story of Lisa, who worked at a rural hospital that operated at the edge of an old forest. Winters there were harsh, and that night, a wild storm battered the building. The parking lot was empty, save for a single police car, and only a skeleton crew was on duty. Around 2 a.m., as Lisa restocked the supply room just beyond the ER holding bay, she heard flurries of footsteps, then a soft, deliberate tap on the glass door. Peering through, she saw a woman, pale, dripping wet in a tattered hospital gown. Her eyes were wide and pleading. Lisa hurried to admit her, but as she approached, the woman faded, blurring at the edges until she simply wasn't there. Later, Lisa would learn of the legend surrounding the Wanderer, a patient who'd vanished without a trace during a blizzard decades prior. She'd ventured outside while disoriented, never died to be found. Supposedly, in every major storm since, staff would see her, always outside the door, always trying to come in. Lisa never told anyone, not at first. But over the next several winters, other nurses admitted to seeing glimpses of the same spectral woman, always in the snow, always just beyond the glass, always gone before anyone could reach her. Then there are those moments that seem impossible to rationalize, the times when entire teams witness the same unexplained event. Gina was used to difficult shifts, but nothing could have prepared her for the night a power outage plunged the ER into darkness. Backup lights flickered uncertainly, casting long, wobbly shadows on every surface. As staff scrambled to adapt, Gina heard a thud from the far end of the hall. Thinking a patient had fallen, she rushed toward the sound, 2 fellow nurses at her heels. What they found was chilling. The doors to the old psychiatric wing, long since closed and padlocked, stood wide open. The hallway beyond was pitch black, but the unmistakable sound of weeping drifted out, echoing against the tiled walls. No keys had been assigned for that entrance in over a year. The padlock was rusted shut hours earlier. Seconds later, as they stood paralyzed, the doors slowly closed, creaking on their ancient hinges until they trembled shut with a final decisive snap. The crying ceased instantly. The lights surged back to full power. No one could adequately explain the phenomenon. When facilities examined the door, they could find no sign of forced entry, just the old rusted lock in place, as if nothing had happened at all. Not all tales end in shivers or regret. Sometimes, the hospital's ghosts seem to be lingering out of kindness or unfinished business. A nurse from years gone by, tending to lost patients. A mother waiting for her child. A father refusing to leave until his family is safe. But some stories, some leave a cold residue, a hint of something much darker lurking at the edge of the visible world. Consider the story of Marcus, a big-hearted, burly ER nurse who prided himself on staying composed in any crisis. For months, rumors swirled about the Screamer, a wailing cry that echoed down the halls on certain nights, chilling staff and patients alike. No source could be found, and explanations ranging from faulty pipes to wind between the window panes were tested, but nothing fit. Then came the night Marcus heard it himself. It was a drawn-out, keening sound, like a soul in torment. He and an orderly, both skeptical, walked the length of the ER, chasing the noise from corridor to corridor. Every time they neared, the sound drifted away, echoing off through an impossibly long hallway. It finally stopped outside an old operating room, perpetually locked and unused since a fatal accident many years prior. As Marcus stood there, ice crawling up his spine, something slammed on the door from the inside. 3 sharp, agonized knocks. The next morning, when the day crew unlocked the room for routine maintenance, they found, bizarrely, a small red handprint smeared on the inside of the door, and no sign of anyone or anything inside. These are the stories that dwell in the minds of night shift nurses. Most are passed in silence, shared as warnings to new hires, or swapped during the rare, quiet moments when the ER pauses between storms of activity. Some prefer not to speak of them at all, fearing that giving voice to these memories will somehow make them more real. Those who have spent years working ER nights joke about the witching hour, but few find it funny when they're left alone in the dimly lit hallways, accompanied only by the faint beeping of monitors and the whisper of old stories. For these nurses, hospitals are more than temples of healing. They are liminal spaces, bridges between this world and whatever waits beyond. Yet, within all these stories, of shadows on the bed, pale figures in the snow, or the weeping child in a closed wing, one theme endures: compassion. For every terrifying encounter, there is always a nurse's hand, steady and kind, reaching out to comfort not just the living, but possibly the dead as well. Perhaps that's why so many nurses, after years of working the night shift, carry an odd sense of peace about the things they've seen. They've looked fear in the face, withstood the unknown, and continued to care for whoever or whatever needs help in the darkest hours of the night. So the next time you find yourself in a hospital after midnight, listen closely. The things you hear, the distant footsteps, the hushed voices, the echo of a call light, might not always have a rational explanation. But know that whatever moves through those hallways, you're not alone. Somewhere, a nurse is still moving steadily through the darkness, watching, listening, and perhaps whispering a gentle goodnight to the living and to... I never truly believed in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I'd heard nurses swap stories over stale break room coffee, tales about shadowy figures at the end of hallways, whispers coming from empty rooms, cold spots that seemed to breathe with their own dreadful hunger. But I chalked it up to stress, exhaustion, the twisted tricks a mind plays after a 16-hour shift. Not until the events surrounding Room 309 did I finally learn just how wrong I was. It began inauspiciously, just another gray Monday at St. Juniper Memorial. The ER was overrun, as usual. Drunks with cracked heads, frail old men gasping around tight chests, kids sporting all manner of injuries. We did our best, patching wounds both visible and hidden, running on adrenaline and coffee. But for as long as I'd worked there, Room 309 always sat a little apart from the chaos. It was tucked at the far end of the north wing, right where the newer annex gave way to the original stone wings, built back when the hospital didn't have air conditioning, and children's laughter echoed from the charity orphanage across the street. Room 309's light always flickered, no matter how many times the facility swapped the bulb. The paint peeled in odd patterns, revealing old brick beneath, shapes like grasping hands or leering faces if you stared too long. Patients went in, but the turnover was higher than elsewhere. A run of inexplicable complications, code blues, rapid declines. Some nurses, the ones who'd weathered decades, whispered of a curse. I, being rational, shrugged them off until the night they assigned me there. My patient was Stanley Rourke, a 62-year-old found unconscious in his driveway. Overdose, they said, but his tox screen came back clear. I checked his wristband as I wheeled him in, noting the strange bruises on his forearms, dark, finger-shaped marks standing out against papery skin. He groaned in his stupor, muttering snatches of some slurred song. "Easy, Mr. Rourke," I said, adjusting his blankets. The room felt wrong, an unsettling blend of sour antiseptic and old dust, laced with something coppery and sweet. The overhead light stuttered. I told myself it was faulty wiring. As I charted his vitals, the monitor blipped steady and sure. I prepped his IV. Something about the hollowness of the room made me want to finish quickly. The curtain shivered in a draft, though the windows had been sealed since the renovation. I told myself I was tired. I'd pulled a double after all. Shadows gathered thick under the bed and in the corners, flickering as if in silent conversation. I was about to leave when Stanley's eyes snapped open. The blue irises were wide, their whites jaundiced, but he focused directly on me. He opened his mouth and gasped, "Don't leave me, please." The words stopped me cold. He reached, clutching my arm with a strength that didn't belong to someone so frail. His fingertips dug in, cold and desperate. "What's wrong, Stanley?" He squeezed tighter, voice breaking. "She comes at night. She sits at the end of the bed. She drags her nails. Listen, listen." He went rigid, shuddering. Don't. Sleep." The monitor screamed. Nurses rushed in, coded him, stabilized. They wheeled him out, muttering. But Stanley Rourke never came back to 309. He died 2 hours later. After the commotion settled, I cleaned the empty bed. I thought I heard a susurrus, a whisper, like cloth dragged across linoleum. But when I turned, there was nothing. Only the old walls breathing slow, ancient breath. That week, I was reassigned to room 309 again and again. A run they called bad luck. Each patient came with strange stories. A woman who scribbled ciphers across her pillowcase in her sleep. A teenager with asthma who swore she heard footsteps pacing the ceiling. An old man who screamed whenever the lights dimmed, babbling in a language no one could place. Their hands always bore the same curious bruises, thin and in pairs, as if clutched by something unseen. Sleep became elusive. At home, I found myself checking corners, jumping at the groan of old pipes. Each night, Stanley's dying words echoed, "Don't sleep. She comes at night." I tried to push the fear down, but it twisted, festering. One night, in the earliest blue hush before dawn, I drew the short straw for the late shift. 309 stood empty. My supervisor told me to deep clean. I fetched supplies, propped the door open, and set to work. The light, now more of a dull buzz, flickered. I set down my mop bucket and knelt to scrub, the tile cold against my knees. Halfway through, I felt an impossible chill. It slid down my spine, a crawling, bone-deep cold. I stopped, heart thrumming hard. From the corner of my eye, The bed shifted. The curtain, though there was no breeze, twitched. There were footsteps outside in the hall, followed by silence. I stood staring at the peeling paint. That night, it resembled faces contorted in agony, eyes wide, mouth stretched too far, and then I saw her. A hunched figure, pale as linen, sat at the foot of the bed. A woman, or what had been a woman, her hair matted in thick ropes. She wore a faded blue hospital gown smeared with old blood. Her back was to me, but her limbs were impossibly long, ending in hands with grotesquely extended fingers. She scraped one ragged nail across the metal bed frame, a sound like wet chalk. She turned. Her face was abomination, mouth sewn nearly shut, lips stretched wide in a black grimace, eyes sunken yet burning, brittle strands of black hair clinging to ruined skin. A dry rope of a tongue flicked from her mouth, snaking over the crusted stitches. I could not move. My lungs burned, locked in terror. She whispered, and the sound was 100 voices, pleading, moaning, all echoing Rourke's, the teenagers, the old woman's. She reached, her hand spanning the length of the mattress, bruised with darkness at every knuckle. Her touch brushed my wrist. I flinched. Cold enveloped me, and I saw all at once decades of suffering. Children quarantined in this very room as the world outside died in fever. A nurse crushed beneath debris in the quake of '62. A suicide. A child lost. A mother who waited and waited and wailed until her voice turned to iron and her face to malice. She whispered, "Stay." It took everything in me to break the spell, to stagger back. Her shape swelled, filling the room with shadow, her face splitting wide with a wet, awful grin. She surged, impossibly fast. I stumbled, crashing into the supply cart. The door slammed of its own accord. The wind howled. I threw my shoulder against the exit, bursting free into the icy hall, breath coming in ragged gulps. Behind me, the door to 309 rattled, hinges shrieking, the light above it pulsing an ugly, jaundiced yellow. Then silence, utter, consuming. I didn't sleep for days. My supervisors, noting my haggard face, told me to take time off. I said nothing about what I'd seen. Who would believe me? I scoured the hospital records, hungry for answers, but most of the old files had vanished, lost to the fire that swept the North Wing decades ago. Only whispers remained, the stories told in cautious tones, legends of the weeping lady of 309, said to mourn for all lost patients. They said she had been a nurse herself once, condemned for some dreadful failure. Her love turned to madness, her care twisted by grief, but whatever she was, she had stayed. Even now, patients assigned to room 309 report night terrors, waking with fresh bruises, talking in voices not their own. Some claim to see a woman sitting quietly at the bed's foot, her face hidden by dark hair. Others, like me, never speak of it, but go pale at the mention of that number. Nowadays, I refuse to step foot in the North Wing. Even passing it, I feel her eyes, ancient, patient, seething with the sorrow of 1,000 untold deaths. I see her stretching those dreadful hands, hungry for company, desperate that she not be forgotten. Sometimes, in the throes of sleep, I feel her clutching my wrist with icy intent, dragging me toward that peeling door, whispering in many voices, "Stay, stay, stay," And then I jolt awake, sweating, heart hammering out a wild, hopeless rhythm. Room 309 waits, ever patient. And I hear Stanley's last prayer, over and over. Don't sleep, she comes at night. If you ever find yourself at St. Juniper Memorial, wandering lost, passed from nurse to nurse, keep walking past the north wing. If you glimpse a pale woman in a blue gown sitting quietly at the end of a hospital bed, do not meet her gaze. Do not answer. And whatever you do, don't let her touch you, for some doors, once opened, never shut again.